The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Book 2, Part 1, Anthropogenesis, stanzas translated with commentaries, from the Secret Book of John. Stanza 2. Nature unaided fails. Subsections. Verse 5. After enormous periods, the earth creates monsters. Verse 6. The creators are displeased. Verse 7. They dry the earth. Verse 5. The real world for 30 crores of years, or 300 million. Note, 300 million years, or 3 occult ages. The Rig Veda has the same division. In the Physician's Hymn 1097:1, it is said that the plants came into being 3 ages, 3 yugam, before the gods, on our earth. See chronology of the Brahmins at the end of this stanza. End of note. It constructed rupas, forms, soft stones that hardened, minerals, hard plants that softened, vegetation, visible from invisible, insects and small lives, sarisripa, svapada. She, the earth, shook them off her back whenever they overran their mother. This relates to an inclination of the axis, of which there were several, to a consequent deluge and chaos on earth, having, however, no reference to primeval chaos, in which monsters, half human, half animal, were generated. We find it mentioned in the Book of the Dead and also in the Chaldean account of creation on the Kuta tablets, however mutilated. It is not even allegory. Here we have facts that are found repeated in the account of Pimande, as well as in the Chaldean tablets of creation. The verses may almost be checked by the cosmogony as given by Berosus, which has been disfigured out of recognition by Eusebius, but some of the features of which may yet be found in fragments left by ancient Greek authors, Apollodorus, Alexander Polyester, etc., etc. The watermen, terrible and bad, who are the production of physical nature alone, a result of the evolutionary impulse, and the first attempt to create man, the crown, and the aim and goal of all animal life on earth, are shown to be failures in our stanzas. Do we not find the same in the Berosian cosmogony, denounced with such vehemence as the culmination of heathen absurdity? And yet who of the evolutionists can say that things in the beginning have not come to pass as they are described? That, as maintained in the Puranas, the Egyptian and Chaldean fragments, and even in Genesis, there have not been 2 and even more creations before the last formation of the globe, which, changing its geological and atmospheric conditions, change also its flora, its fauna, and its men. This claim agrees not only with every ancient cosmogony, but also with modern science, and even to a certain degree with the theory of evolution, as may be demonstrated in a few words. There is no dark creation, no evil dragon conquered by a sun god in the earliest world cosmogonies. Even with the Akkads, the great deep, the watery abyss or space, was the birthplace and abode of Ea, wisdom, the incognizable infinite deity. But with the Semites and the later Chaldeans, the fathomless deep of wisdom becomes gross matter, sinful substance, and Ea is changed into Tiamat, the dragon slain by Merodach, or Satan, in the astral waves. In the Hindu Puranas, Brahma, the creator, is seen recommencing de novo several creations after as many failures. The 2 great creations are mentioned, these 2, the Padma and the Varaha, the present, when the earth was lifted out of the water by Brahma in the shape of a ball, or Varaha avatar. Note on 2 great creations. These 2 must not be confused with the 7 creations or divisions in each kalpa. See Book 1, the 7 creations. The primary and secondary creations are here meant. End of note. Creation is shown as a sport, an amusement, lila, of the creative God. The Zohar speaks of primordial worlds, which perished as soon as they came into existence, and the same is said in Midrash. Rabbi Abbahu explaining distinctly in Bereshit Rabbah, Parsha 9, that the Holy One had successively created and destroyed sundry worlds before he succeeded in the present one. This does not relate only to other worlds in space, but to a mystery of our own globe contained in the allegory about the kings of Edom. For the words, "This one pleases me," are repeated in Genesis 1:31, though in disfigured terms, as usual. The Chaldean fragments of cosmogony on the cuneiform inscriptions and elsewhere show two distinct creations of animals and men, the first being destroyed as it was a failure. The cosmogonical tablets prove that this our actual creation was preceded by others. See Hibbert Lectures, page 390, and as shown by the author of the Kabbalah in the Zohar, Zifra Zeniuta, in Jova Rabbah 128a, etc., etc. The Kabbalah states the same. Verse 5 continued. After 30 crores of years she turned round. She laid on her back, on her side. She would call no sons of heaven. She would ask no sons of wisdom. She created from her own bosom. She evolved watermen, terrible and bad. Oannes, or dragon, the Chaldean manfish, divides his cosmogony and Genesis into two portions. First, the abyss of waters and darkness, wherein resided most hideous beings, men with wings, 4 and 2-faced men, human beings with 2 heads, with the legs and horns of a goat, our goatmen, hippocentaurs, bulls with the heads of men, and dogs with tails of fishes. In short, combinations of various animals and men, or fishes, reptiles, and other monstrous animals, assuming each other's shapes and countenances. Note on our goatmen. Whence the identity of the ideas? The Chinese have the same traditions. According to the commentator Kuo Po in the work called Shanghai King, Wonders by Sea and Land, a work which was written by the historiographer Chung Ku, from engravings on 9 urns made by the Emperor Yu, before Christ 2255. An interview is mentioned with men having 2 distinct faces on their heads, before and behind, monsters with bodies of goats and human faces, etc. Gould, in his Mythical Monsters, page 27, giving the names of some authors of natural history, mentions Shanghai King. According to Kuo Po, Anno Domini 276 to 324, this work was compiled 3,000 years before his time, or at 7 dynasties' distance. Yang Sun of the Ming dynasty, commencing Anno Domini 1368, states that it was compiled by Chung Tia and Chung Ku, as stated above. Chung Ku, at the time of the last emperor of the Hia dynasty, before Christ 1818, fearing that the emperor might destroy the books treating of the ancient time, carried them in his flight to Yin. See Mythical Monsters by C. Gould, page 27, end of note. The feminine element they resided in is personified by Talat, the sea or water, which was finally conquered by Belus, the male principle. And Polyhistor says, Belus came and cut the woman asunder, and of one half of her he formed the earth, and of the other half the heavens. And at the same time he destroyed the animals within her. As pertinently remarked by I. Meyer, with the Akkadians each object and power of nature had its Z, spirit. The Akkadians formed their deities into triads, usually males, within brackets sexless rather, ? The Semites also had triadic deities, but introduced sex, page 246, or phallicism. With the Aryans and the earliest Akkadians, all things are emanations through, not by, a creator or logos. With the Semites, everything is begotten. Verse 6. The watermen, terrible and bad, she herself created. From the remains of others, from the mineral, vegetable, and animal remains. From the first, second, and third rounds, she formed them. The Dhyani came and looked. The Dhyani from the bright father-mother, from the white solar lunar regions, they came. from the abodes of the immortal mortals. Note on the Dhyani came gods and planetary spirits, especially Ribhus, the 3 Ribhus, who yet become thrice 7 in number of their grifts. End of note. The explanations given in our stanzas are far more clear than that which the legend of creation from the Kuta tablet would give, even were it complete. What is preserved on it, however, corroborates them, for in the tablet the Lord of Angels destroys the men in the abyss when there were not left their carcasses and waste, after they were slaughtered. After which they, the great gods, create men with the bodies of birds of the desert, human beings, 7 kings' brothers of the same family, etc., which is a reference to the locomotive qualities of the primary ethereal bodies of men, which could fly as well as they could walk, but who were destroyed because they were not, quote, perfect, unquote. That is, they were sexless, like the kings of Edom. Note, remember the winged races of Plato. The Popol Vuh accounts of the first human race, which could walk, fly, and see objects however distant. End of note. With their metaphors and allegories, what will science say to this idea of a primordial creation of species? It will object to the angels and spirits having anything to do therewith. But if it is nature and the physical law of evolution that are the creators of all there is now on earth, why could there be no such abyss, when the globe was covered with waters, in which numbers of monstrous beings were generated? Is it the human beings and animals with human heads and double faces which are a point of the objection? But if man is only a higher animal, and has evolved from the brute species by an infinite series of transformations, why could not the, quote, missing links, unquote, have had human heads attached to the bodies of animals, or, being two-headed, have heads of beasts, and vice versa, in nature's early efforts? Are we not shown during the geological periods in the agents of the reptiles and the mammalia, lizards with birds' wings, and serpents' heads on animal bodies? Note, see Mythical Monsters by Charles Gould. End of note. And arguing from the standpoint of science, does not even our modern human race occasionally furnish us with monster specimens, 2-headed children, animal bodies with human heads, dog-headed babies, etc., etc., and this proves that if nature will still play such freaks now that she has settled for ages into the order of her evolutionary work, monsters like those described by Berossus were a possibility in her opening program, which possibility may even have existed once upon a time as a law, before she sorted out her species and began regular work upon them, which indeed now admits of definite proof by the bare fact of reversion, as science puts it. This is what the doctrine teaches and demonstrates by numerous proofs. But we shall not wait for the approval of either dogmatic theology or materialistic science, but proceed with the stanzas. Let these speak for themselves, with the help of the light thrown by the commentaries and their explanations. The scientific aspect of these questions will be considered later on. Thus, physical nature, when left to herself in the creation of animal and man, is shown to have failed. She can produce the first 2 and the low animal kingdoms, but when it comes to the turn of man, spiritual, independent, and intelligent powers are required for his creation, besides the coats of skin and the breath of animal life. The human monads of preceding rounds need something higher than purely physical materials to build their personalities with, under the penalty of remaining even below any Frankenstein animal. Note, in the first volume of the lately published Introduction à l'étude des races humaines by M. de Quatrefages, there is proof that since the post-tertiary period, and even before that time, since many races were already scattered during that age on the face of the earth, man has not altered 1 iota in his physical structure. And if surrounded for ages by a fauna that altered from one period or cycle to another which died out, which was reborn in other forms, so that now there does not exist one single animal on earth, large or small, contemporary with the man of that period, if, then, every animal has been transformed, save man himself, this fact goes to prove not only his antiquity, but that he is a distinct kingdom. Why should he alone have escaped transformation? Because, says Anthropogenesis, the weapon used by him in his struggle with nature and the ever-changing geological conditions and elements was his psychic force, not his physical strength or body, as in the case of animals. Give man only that dose of intelligence and reason with which other mammalia are endowed, and with his present bodily organization, he will show himself the most helpless of creatures on earth. And as everything goes to prove that the human organism, with all its characteristics, peculiarities, and idiosyncrasies, existed already on our globe in those far-distant geological periods when there was not yet one single specimen of the now existing forms of mammalia, what is the unavoidable conclusion? Why this: since all the human races are of one and the same species, it follows that this species is the most ancient of all the now living mammalia. Therefore, it is the most stable and persevering of all, and was already as fully developed as it is now, when all the other mammalia now known had not made even their first approach to appearance on this earth. Such is the opinion of the great French naturalist, who gives thereby a terrible blow to Darwinism. End of note. Verse 7. Displeased they were. Our flesh is not there, they said. This is no fit rupa for our brothers of the fifth, no dwellings for the lives. Pure waters, not turbid, they must drink. Let us dry them, the waters. Note: the monads of the presentments of men of the third round, the huge ape-like forms. End of note. It is from the material worlds that descend they, who fashion physical man at the new manvantaras. They are inferior law spirits, possessed of a dual body, an astral within an ethereal form. They are the fashioners and creators of our body of illusion. Into the forms projected by the law, Pitris, the two letters, the monad called also the double dragon, descend from the spheres of expectation, but they are like a roof with no walls, nor pillars to rest upon. Notes: in the esoteric system, the 7 principles in man are represented by 7 letters. The first 2 are more sacred than the 4 letters of the tetragrammaton, and the intermediate spheres, wherein the monads which have not reached nirvana are said to slumber in unconscious inactivity between the manvantaras. End of notes. Man needs 4 flames and 3 fires to become one on earth, and he requires the essence of the 49 fires to be perfect. Note: explained elsewhere. The 3 fires, Pavaka, Pavamana, and Sukhi, who had 45 sons, who, with their 3 fathers and their father Agni, constitute the 49 fires. Pavamana, fire produced by friction, is the parent of the fire of the Asuras. Sukhi, solar fire, is the parent of the fire of the gods, and Pavaka, electric fire, is the father of the fire of the Pitris. See Vaya Purana. But this is an explanation on the material and the terrestrial plane. The flames are evanescent and only periodical, the fires eternal in their triple unity. They correspond to the 4 lower and the 3 higher human principles. End of note. It is those who have deserted the superior spheres, the gods of will, who complete the manu of illusion. Note: the suras who become later the asuras. End of note. For the double dragon has no hold upon the mere form. It is like the breeze where there is no tree or branch to receive and harbor it. It cannot affect the form where there is no agent of transmission, manas, mind, and the form knows it not. In the highest worlds, the 3 are one. On earth, at first, the 1 becomes 2. Note: the 3 are one. Atma, Buddhi, and manas. In Devakhan, the high element of the manas is needed to make it a state of perception and consciousness for the disembodied monad. End of note. They are like the 2 side lines of a triangle that has lost its bottom line, which is the 3rd fire. Catechism, Book 3, Section 9. Now this requires some explanation before proceeding any further. to do so especially for the benefit of our Aryan Hindu brethren, whose esoteric interpretations may differ from our own. We shall have to explain to them the foregoing by certain passages in their own exoteric books, namely the Puranas. In the allegories of the latter, Brahma, who is collectively the creative force of the universe, is said to be at the beginning of the yugas, cycles, possessed of the desire and of the power to create, and impelled by the potencies of what is to be created. Again and again does he, at the outset of a kalpa, put forth a similar creation. See Vishnu Purana, Book 1, Chapter 5, closing sloka. Also, Manava Dharma Shastra 1:30. It is now proposed to examine the exoteric account in the Vishnu Purana and see how much it may agree or disagree with our occult version. Creation of divine beings in the exoteric accounts. In the Vishnu Purana, which is certainly the earliest of all the scriptures of that name, we find, as in all the others, Brahma assuming as a male god for purposes of creation 4 bodies invested by 3 qualities. Note: this has in esotericism a direct bearing upon the 7 principles of the manifested Brahma or universe in the same order as in man. Exoterically it is only 4 principles. End of note. It is said in this manner: Maitreya, Yotsna, dawn; Ratri, night; Ahan, day; and Sandhya, evening twilight, are the 4 bodies of Brahma. Page 81, Volume 1, Wilson's translation. As Parasara explains it, when Brahma wants to create the world anew and construct progeny through his will, in the 4-fold condition, or the 4 orders of beings, termed gods, Dhyankochans, demons, that is, more material devas, progenitors, pitris, and men, he collects Yogala, Yuyuye, his mind. Note on demons. Demons is a very loose word to use, as it applies to a great number of inferior, that is, more material spirits or minor gods, who are so termed because they war with the higher ones. But they are no devils. End of note. Strange to say, he begins by creating demons, who thus take precedence over the angels or gods. This is no incongruity, nor is it due to inconsistency, but has, like all the rest, a profound esoteric meaning, quite clear to one free from Christian theological prejudice. He who bears in mind that the principal Mahat, or intellect, universal mind, literally the great, which esoteric philosophy explains as the manifested omniscience, the first product of pradana, primordial matter, as Vishnu Purana says, but the first cosmic aspect of Parabrahm, or the esoteric Sat, the universal soul, as occultism teaches, is at the root of self-consciousness, will understand the reason why. Note on the universal soul. The same order of principles in man, Atma, spirit, Buddhi, soul, its vehicle, as matter is the Vahan of spirit and Manas, mind, the 3rd or the 5th, microcosmically. On the plane of personality, Manas is the first. The so-called demons, who are esoterically the self-asserting and intellectually active principle, are the positive poles of creation, so to say, hence the first produced. This is in brief the process as narrated allegorically in the Puranas. Having concentrated his mind into itself and the quality of darkness pervading Brahma's assumed body, the Asuras issuing from his thigh were first produced, after which, abandoning this body, it was transformed into night. See Part 2, section The Fallen Angels. 2 important points are involved herein. A. Primarily in the Rig Veda, the Asuras are shown as spiritual divine beings. Their etymology is derived from Ashu, breath, the breath of God, and they mean the same as the Supreme Spirit or the Zoroastrian Ahura. It is later on, for purposes of theology and dogma, that they are shown issuing from Brahma's thigh, and that their name began to be derived from A, privative, and Sura, God, solar deities, or not a god, and that they became the enemies of the gods. Every ancient theogony without exception, from the Aryan and the Egyptian down to that of Hesiod, places in the order of cosmogonical evolution night before the day, even Genesis, where darkness is upon the face of the deep before the first day. The reason for this is that every cosmogony, except in the secret doctrine, begins by the secondary creation, so-called, to wit, the manifested universe, the genesis of which has to open by a marked differentiation between the eternal light of primary creation, whose mystery must remain forever darkness to the prying finite conception and intellect of the profane, and the secondary evolution of manifested visible nature. The Veda contains the whole philosophy of that division without having ever been correctly explained by our Orientalists, because it has never been understood by them. Continuing to create, Brahma assumes another form, that of the day, and creates from his breath the gods, who are endowed with the quality of goodness, passivity. Note. Thus, says the commentary, the saying, by day the gods are most powerful, and by night the demons, is purely allegorical. End of note. In his next body, the quality of great passivity prevailed, which is also negative goodness, and from the side of that personage issued the Pitris, the progenitors of men, because, as the text explains, Brahma thought of himself during the process as the father of the world. Note. This thinking of oneself as this, that, or the other is the chief factor in the production of every kind of psychic or even physical phenomena. The words, whosoever shall say to this mountain, be thou removed and cast into the sea, and shall not doubt that thing will come to pass, are no vain words. Only the word faith ought to be translated by will. Faith without will is like a windmill without wind, barren of results. End of note. This is Kriya Sakti, the mysterious yoga power explained elsewhere. This body of Brahma, when cast off, became the Sadhya, evening twilight, the interval between day and night. Finally, Brahma assumed his last form, pervaded by the quality of foulness, and from this men, in whom foulness and passion predominate, were pronounced. This body, when cast off, became the dawn, or morning twilight, the twilight of humanity. Here Brahma stands esoterically for the Pitris. He is collectively the Pitar, father. The true esoteric meaning of this allegory must now be explained. Brahma here symbolizes personally the collective creators of the world and men, the universe with all its numberless productions of things movable and seemingly immovable. Note, the same idea is found in the first 4 chapters of Genesis, with their Lord and God, which are the Elohim and the androgynous Eloha. End of note. He is collectively the Prajapatis, the Lords of Being, and the 4 bodies typify the 4 classes of creative powers, or Dhyan-koshans, described in the commentary directly following stanza 7 in Book 1. The whole philosophy of the so-called creation of the good and evil in this world, and of the whole cycle of manvantaric results therefrom, hangs on the correct comprehension of these 4 bodies of Brahma. The reader will now be prepared to understand the real, the esoteric significance of what follows. Moreover, there is an important point to be cleared up. Christian theology having arbitrarily settled and agreed that Satan with his fallen angels belonged to the earliest creation, Satan being the first created, the wisest and most beautiful of God's archangels, the word was given, the keynote struck. Henceforth, all the pagan scriptures were made to yield the same meaning, and all were shown to be demonical, and it was and is claimed that truth and fact belong to and commence only with Christianity. Even the Orientalists and mythologists, some of them no Christians at all, but infidels, or men of science, entered unconsciously to themselves and by the mere force of association of ideas and habit into the theological groove. Purely Brahmanical considerations based on greed of power and ambition allowed the masses to remain in ignorance of great truths, and the same causes led the initiates among the early Christians to remain silent, while those who had never known the truth disfigured the order of things, judging of the hierarchy of angels by their exoteric form. Thus, as the Asuras had become the rebellious inferior gods fighting the higher ones in popular creeds, so the highest archangel, in truth the Agathodaimon, the eldest benevolent Logos, became with theology the adversary, or Satan. But is this warranted by the correct interpretation of any old scripture? The answer is, most certainly not. As the Mazdean scriptures of the Zendavesta, the Vendidad, and others correct and expose the later cunning shuffling of the gods in the Hindu pantheon, and restore, through Ahura, the Asuras, to their legitimate place in theogony, so the recent discovery of the Chaldean tablets vindicate the good name of the first divine emanations. This is easily proved. Christian angelology is directly and solely derived from that of the Pharisees, who brought their tenets from Babylonia. The Sadducees, the real guardians of the laws of Moses, knew not of and rejected any angels, opposing even the immortality of the human soul, not impersonal spirit. In the Bible, the only angels spoken of are the sons of God, mentioned in Genesis 6, who are now regarded as the Nephilim, the fallen angels, and several angels in human form, the messengers of the Jewish God, whose own rank needs a closer analysis than heretofore given. Vide supra, stanza 1, subsections 2, 3, et sequens, where it is shown that the early Akkadians called Ea, wisdom, that which was disfigured by the later Chaldees and Semites, into Tismat, Tisalat, and the Talat of Berosus, the female sea-dragon, now Satan. Truly, how art thou fallen by the hand of man, O bright star and son of the morning! Now, what do the Babylonian accounts of creation as found on the Assyrian fragments of tiles tell us? Those very accounts upon which the Pharisees built their angelology. But compare Mr. G. Smith's Assyrian Discoveries, page 398, and his Chaldean account of Genesis, page 107. The tablet with the story of the 7 wicked gods, or spirits, has the following account. 1. In the first days the evil gods. 2. The angels who were in rebellion, who in the lower part of heaven. 3. Had been created. 4. They caused their evil work. 5. Devising with wicked heads, etc. Thus we are shown, as plainly as can be, on a fragment which remained unbroken, so that there can be no dubious reading, that the rebellious angels had been created in the lower part of heaven, that is, that they belonged and do belong to a material plane of evolution, although as it is not the plane on which we are made cognizant through our senses, it remains generally invisible to us, and is thus regarded as subjective. Were the Gnostics so wrong after this in affirming that this our visible world, and especially the earth, had been created by lower angels, the inferior Elohim, of which, as they taught, the God of Israel was one? These Gnostics were nearer in time to the records of the archaic secret doctrine, and therefore ought to be allowed to have known better than the non-initiated Christians, who took upon themselves hundreds of years later to remodel and correct what was said. But let us see what the same tablet says further on. 7. There were 7 of them, the wicked gods. Then follows the description of these, the 4th being a serpent, the phallic symbol of the 4th race in human evolution. 15. The 7 of them messengers of the god Anu, their king. Now, Anu belongs to the Chaldean trinity and is identical with Sin, the moon, in one aspect, and the moon in the Hebrew Kabbalah is the arga of the seed of all material life, and is still more closely connected Kabbalistically with Jehovah, who is double-sexed as Anu is. They are both represented in esotericism and viewed from a dual aspect, male or spiritual, female or material, the spirit and matter, the two antagonistic principles. Hence, the messengers of Anu, whose Sin, the moon, are shown in verses 28 to 41 as being finally overpowered by the same sin with the help of Bel, the sun, and Ishtar, Venus. This is regarded as a contradiction by the Assyriologists, but is simply metaphysics in the esoteric teaching. There is more than one interpretation, for there are 7 keys to the mystery of the fall. Moreover, there are 2 falls in theology, the rebellion of the archangels and their fall, and the fall of Adam and Eve. Thus the lower as well as the higher hierarchies are charged with a supposed crime. The word supposed is the true and correct term, for in both cases it is founded on misconception. Both are considered in occultism as karmic effects, and both belong to the law of evolution, intellectual and spiritual on the one hand, physical and psychic on the other. The fall is a universal allegory. It sets forth at one end of the ladder of evolution the rebellion, that is, the action of differentiating intellection or consciousness on its various planes, seeking union with matter, and at the other, the lower end, the rebellion of matter against spirit, or of action against spiritual inertia. And here lies the germ of an error which has had such disastrous effects on the intelligence of civilized societies for over 1,800 years. In the original allegory it is matter, hence the more material angels, which was regarded as the conqueror of spirit, or the archangels who fell on this plane. They of the flaming sword, or animal passions, had put to flight the spirits of darkness. Yet it is the latter who fought for the supremacy of the conscious and divine spirituality on earth and failed, succumbing to the power of matter. But in theological dogma we see the reverse. It is Michael, who is like unto God, the representative of Jehovah, who is the leader of the celestial hosts, as Lucifer, in Milton's fancy, is of the infernal hosts, who has the best of Satan. It is true that the nature of Michael depends upon that of his creator and master. Who the latter is one may find out by carefully studying the allegory of the war in heaven, with the astronomical key. As shown by Bentley, the war of the Titans against the gods in Hesiod, and also the war of the Asuras, or the Tarakamaya, against the Devas in Puranic legend, are identical in all, save the names. The aspects of the stars show Bentley taking the year 945 before Christ as the nearest date for such conjunction, that all the planets except Saturn were on the same side of the heavens as the sun and moon, and hence were his opponents. And yet it is Saturn, or the Jewish moon god, who is shown as prevailing, both by Hesiod and Moses, neither of whom was understood. Thus it was that the real meaning became distorted. Next chapter is Stanza 2 continued, with verses 8 and 9.